oral questions. Questions orales. Chef.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. 9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised that he would spend without control, but there would be a rich man somewhere who would pay, and not the middle class. 9 years later, what is the reality? 9 out of 10 members of the middle class are paying more in taxes. The wealthiest have doubled their wealth, their net wealth, according to a video put out by the Prime Minister a few days ago. And the majority of middle-class youth cannot even buy a home. Given that he has already broken that promise, why should we believe him now? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our 2024 budget is based on creating generational fairness. Part of that is asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more when they sell investments, very profitable investments. And it's with that we will invest in more housing for youth, more dental care for seniors, more spots in childcare for young families. We are there to help those who need it. The Conservative Party has just announced that they will side with the wealthiest. They won't be there to help the middle class and those working hard to join it. The Leader of the Opposition. That is exactly what he said 9 years ago, and the result, according to his own data published on his Twitter since his arrival in power, the wealth of the wealthiest has doubled, as taxes on the middle class and the cost of housing have also doubled. Mr. Speaker, why is it that every time he promises to increase taxes on the wealthiest, it's the poor and the middle class who foot the bill? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's the same types of justifications the Conservative Party gave in 2015 when they voted against increasing taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. It's the same type of argument they used to vote against the Canada Child Benefit that lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And today, they are in the same situation, defending advantages for the wealthiest in this country, while we are asking for a little more to help with housing for young people, helping seniors with dental care, and many other things, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised he could spend uncontrollably and there'd be a rich guy on a hill somewhere who would pay the bill. Yep. The middle class wouldn't have to pay. Well, what is the result? According to him, the total net worth of the richest Canadians has doubled since he took office. Meanwhile, 9 in 10 middle-class Canadians are paying more tax. Housing costs have doubled, so 76% of middle-class youth believe they'll never afford a home. 2 million people line up at a food bank because they can't afford to eat on a middle-class salary. Given that he already broke this exact same promise over 9 years, why should we believe him this time?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if it didn't have real-world impacts on Canadians, it would almost be amusing to watch the Conservative leader tie himself in knots to try and justify voting in favour of advantages for the wealthy Canadians when they sell really profitable investments. We're asking them to pay a little bit more so we can invest more in housing for young people to be able to have the same kinds of opportunities previous generations did. We're delivering dental care for over 200,000 seniors in just the last 6 weeks. We're delivering more spaces in childcare. We're stepping up for Canadians. They're stepping up for the rich.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Real-world impacts. Yep. That's what we have today after 9 years of this Prime Minister promising to tax, borrow, and spend us into fairness. But according to the StatsCan data he put out himself since he became Prime Minister, the net worth of the wealthiest Canadians has doubled. Why? Because the taxes he puts always land on the middle class. 9 in 10 middle-class people are paying higher taxes. The vast majority of Canadians, than 100% of middle class, are paying higher carbon tax, and his last round of small business tax hikes hit plumbers and electricians, not the rich. Why is it that every time he mentions the middle class, they get poor?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our price on pollution delivers more money to 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country with the Canada Carbon Rebate. And today, Mr. Speaker, there's an opportunity for everyone in this House to stand up and ask the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more when they sell extremely profitable investments. We are doing that on this side of the House. The Conservatives will be protecting the advantage that is there for the wealthiest Canadians while we invest more in housing, while we invest more in dental care, while we invest more in Canadians who need it.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if you are a small business owner, you have even $1 of investment gain, the Prime Minister is promising, because there's no exemption inside the 300,000 small businesses. And it's incredible that during a housing shortage, he wants to tax home builders. During a healthcare shortage, he wants to tax away our doctors. During a food price crisis, he wants to tax our farmers. And while our economy is shrinking more than any other economy in the G7, he wants to tax our small business job creators. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the definition of insanity?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Since we put our budget forward, the Conservatives have been incredibly careful not to say a thing about the capital gains rate that we're raising. They didn't want to talk about it for 2 full months, and today, when they are choosing to vote with the wealthiest Canadians and against young Canadians who need more housing, young Canadians who need a better break, seniors who need dental care, they're all trying to spin it in 9 different ways. The reality is they have an opportunity to vote with middle-class Canadians, and they're choosing to vote against them.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't have the habit of listening or reading to what the RCMP suggests, but the RCMP is saying it doesn't have the tools to counter a threat to security, to social peace, the threat of hate speech. It doesn't have the tools to do its work. Obviously, the religious defense in the criminal code that allows people to say and incite violence is a precious tool for those who want to sow violence. Does the Prime Minister agree to repeal the religious exemption from the criminal code? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, hate speech and anti-Semitism have no place in Canada. Our government fights racism and hatred like no government has done in the past, introducing an act on online harms, funding increased protection for mosques, synagogues, and places of worship, and our plan to criminalize the Holocaust denial. We recognize there is more to do. We will continue to work with our police services with the necessary laws to strengthen protection for all in this country. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. How to waste 35 precious seconds. Mr. Speaker, the streets of Montreal and other cities in Quebec and Canada are subject to protests and open invitations to hatred when it is not, frankly, to violence. There are even calls to exterminate the people of Israel. What does it take for the Prime Minister to protect the people he is responsible for? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for years we've been investing to create more protection for mosques and synagogues and places of worship and community centres. We will continue to work with police forces across the country to protect people and highlight that it's important for all Canadians to remember our values of respect, openness, tolerance, and acceptance. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there to, yes, allow people to protest within the law and within peace, but also be there to fight hate speech and calls for violence.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Yesterday, the Liberals finally woke up. They realized that it's unfair for nurses and carpenters to pay more taxes than billionaires. Well, clearly they didn't have a problem with that for the past 8 years. So why did the Prime Minister let carpenters and nurses pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets in a row?
I'm just going to ask the honourable member from Caribou Prince George to please not take the floor unless he's recognized by the chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one of the very first things we did in 2015 was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. I will recall that the NDP at that time actually voted against that measure. But right now, we're putting forward a measure to ask the wealthiest Canadians who make a tremendous amount of profits when they sell extremely profitable investments to actually pay a little bit more on those profits so that we can invest in more housing, in more supports for seniors, in a range of things to create fairness for every generation. The Conservatives are choosing to vote against that, and they're standing once again with the wealthiest.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Have done this 8 years ago.
Yesterday, the Liberals woke up. They realized that it wasn't fair for nurses to pay more tax than billionaires. But they didn't think it was unfair over the past 8 years. Why has the Prime Minister forced nurses to pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, we increased taxes for the wealthiest 1%, and we decreased them for the middle class. And since then, at that time, the NDP voted against those measures. We are fighting for the middle class and those working hard to join it. That is why we are asking the wealthiest, who make huge profits by selling their investments, to pay a little more so that we can deliver on housing, deliver on dental care, deliver more childcare spaces for Canadians who need them. Unfortunately, once again, the Conservatives are siding with the wealthiest against middle-class Canadians.